All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Annika Lee, and I'm the Membership and Communications Coordinator at the Digital Technology Supercluster. And I am pleased to welcome you to our webinar today, Waking Up to Cyber Attacks. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada, we live, work, and learn on the unceded, traditional, and ancestral land of Indigenous people. And as myself and much of the Supercluster team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here virtually on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And we encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants afterwards, as well as posted on our Supercluster website. And if at any point during the session you have a question, please feel free to type it into the Q&A chat and we'll address them at the end of the session. I'd now like to hand it over to Jen, our IP manager at the Supercluster.
Thank you, Annika. And hello, everybody. Bonjour and welcome. It's wonderful to have so many joining in from across the country in this, what is the third installment of the IP Focus series that's planned for this year. Whether you're new to the Supercluster or our returning face, we're thrilled that you could join us for today's Power Hour. The cybersecurity landscape is ever evolving. According to a 2022 Sophos report, ransomware is the most prevalent means of attack and fast becoming an extremely lucrative business stream, with ransomware as a service, otherwise known as RAS, enabling criminals to purchase monthly access subscriptions to user-friendly ransomware kits on the dark web, and thereby leaving any business in Canada, small to large, subject to attack. Over these next 60 minutes, we'll cover items that include the cyber risk continuum, why it's important to have cyber insurance, and peek at compliance and disclosure requirements, and a Q&A portion to close us out. Next slide, please. A foundational component of the Supercluster is collaborative innovation, setting the framework for projects that address cross-industry challenges while creating technology products that can scale across industries and ultimately across the world. The Digital Supercluster's IP strategy supports the development, ownership, and retention of Canadian IP through a number of vehicles, and informational sessions with industry thought leaders like we've today are one example of that. Next slide, please. I've the pleasure of introducing today's thought leader. Please join me in welcoming Sunny Handa. Sunny is a partner at Blake's, National Practice Group Leader of the firm's Technology and Communications Law Groups, and plays a lead role in the firm's national cybersecurity practice. A Canadian thought leader in cybersecurity and a senior breach coach, he has a substantial practice in mergers and acquisitions, as well as expertise in communications matters and intellectual property protection matters in information technology, life sciences, health, and biotech. An adjunct professor of law at McGill University and published author, whose writings have been quoted and cited with approval by courts across Canada, including the Supreme Court of Canada. Sunny has also been recognized as a leading lawyer, both nationally and internationally, by the Canadian Legal Expert Dictionary, Chambers Global, Who's Who Legal, the Legal 500, and Managing Intellectual Property IP Stars. Without further ado, Sunny, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jen, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'm based in Montreal, so it's afternoon here. I imagine there's a few other folks who are in different time zones other than BC as well. So thank you for that kind introduction. I think if you can glean anything from that introduction, it's I love tech, I love everything about tech, and I've enjoyed working in the space for my entire life, actually, prior to law. Worked in the programming area and really also in early networking, ran an ISP for a time, as well as a software development shop while putting myself through law school. Today, though, things have changed, and I have found that over the past 24 months, I have spent, I would say, I was looking yesterday and trying to figure out the exact number. It's hard to do, but somewhere about 80 to 90% of my working life dealing with cyber and information security issues. This thing has sort of hit with a massive wave. It is affecting all manners of industry. And yet, even though we are seeing so many different organizations get attacked, what I'm continuing to find is there's still a relative unfamiliarity on the part of business leaders and others who are responsible for running organizations. So part of what I do is I go out there and I'm trying to raise the alarm. I'm not Chicken Little, the sky is not falling, but you guys do need to be aware of this stuff. So what I'd like to do with my time with you today, and I'll probably take about 40 minutes or so, and then we can move to questions, is really to walk you through cybersecurity as it exists at this point in time. It's forever evolving. That's why I give myself that little disclaimer. Want to talk to you a little bit about sort of what is cybersecurity? What's the worry? What's happening out there? Give you a bit of a flavor for that, and then talk to you about how you can prepare yourself. And all through the presentation, I will tell you a number of anecdotes. I will not name names for the companies I've dealt with or organizations. Obviously, that's confidential, but done a lot of work in this space. And we keep careful stats in this area, and my team did over 100, I think it was 109 or something, different cyber breaches last year. I myself worked on 57 of them. So there was a lot of work getting done. And when you do go through a breach, and you will, sorry to say, everyone's going to have an information security issue at some point. You will really get a taste of what it is. And I'll try to give you a bit of a preview today, but it is all-encompassing, massively stressful, and it really does take the focus of an organization, away from what it otherwise does for a number of weeks, and in some cases, even months. So let's, without further ado on that front, let's just jump into it. And sorry if I'm not looking right at you. I just have my my screen with all my notes next to me, so that's why my gaze is slightly away. So, I think the first thing that's really important to understand is this is not an IT issue. I think for those who are uninitiated, it sounds like an IT issue. It's like, oh yeah, this is all about technology stuff, and I have an IT director and they'll take care of it, or I have a chief security officer. This is about enterprise and organizational risk. A digital attack can affect all aspects of your business, everything from supply chain to your customers, to your employees, to your finances. Everyone gets affected. This is not an IT issue. It starts off that way for sure. That's how they get in, and that's how they sort of, affect or hurt your enterprise. But at the end of the day, this is not something that needs to be dealt with by the IT director. This goes to the C-suite or the equivalent, and you need to, if you're on a board, for example, or you're part of the C-suite, you need to be focused on these issues. They don't need to be all consuming, but you need to have those discussions and start to have them internally and start to take appropriate steps. So who's at risk? Everyone. We're all at risk. Now, I don't want you to all run out and panic about your own personal setup. The sophisticated threat actors are not interested in you. You might certainly be collateral damage personally at your house in an attack, but they're really after organizations. And what kind of organizations? Everyone. So in some cases, they just sort of go willy-nilly everywhere. Certain threat groups will attack anyone with an opening who has a vulnerability. Others are a little more focused. They will look up Zoom info, they'll look up Bloomberg, they'll try to figure out who's got money, who's doing well, and they will go after them. And so they're much more focused. Where are they attacking? Again, it is indiscriminate. Generally, if they look for vulnerability, the World Wide Web and the internet is global. So those vulnerabilities exist. They don't know necessarily where you're located. I've had instances where they've attacked government crown corporations or government departments. And when we engage with the threat actor, they have no idea who they've attacked, none, and they don't really care. They just know they've got data. and they want a ransom to be paid. So it's a bit messy out there. Some are better than others in terms of targeting certain companies, but everyone is in the crosshairs. And typically, our group here is handling anywhere from sort of 10 to 20 breaches at a time. And those keep coming in and have been, and there's no slowdown to that. So what are the types of attacks? What can happen to you? Well, the most common one, and I think Jen may have alluded to it, is ransomware. Ransomware is the granddaddy of them all. Ransomware is where, and I'll go through it in detail, but at the end of the day, it's an extortion attack. They want money and they want you to willingly pay them money in return for something, and we'll go through what that something is. Another type of attack that is almost as frequent, but is a much easier attack to carry out, is something known as a business email compromise attack. And that is really easy. You get in through, you find someone's credentials out, you get in through a phishing attack where you send someone an attachment, they click on it, and you get in there. And what you do, the simplest form of a business email compromise is you go into someone's email box, you add a few forwarding rules, you make sure that any email they get gets put into a folder on their own system that they don't get to see. And you go and look at that folder before they get to, because they don't know it's even in there. And if it's just a regular email, you as the threat actor move it to their inbox so they get to see it and they think the email just came in. And if it's email that may have something interesting for you, maybe you leave it in that folder and you start to impersonate the individual whose credentials you've stolen. Now you might say, okay, well, so what? Somebody's impersonating me. I don't like the idea, but they're very crafty. And so what they do is they will certainly focus on people in the finance group, things like that, where they might be able to trigger a wire transfer so they might intercept, for example, something between you and a customer or you and a supplier, wherever there's a money flow that's about to happen, and they engage in a conversation with your partner, your supplier or your customer. They think it's you, and they provide new banking details. They do this. Now you might say, come on, does that really happen? That happens all the time. We had one recently where the wire that went out was, I think it was about $900,000. So, now you might think that that's a huge sum. We'll get into some big sums later, but these are mid-sized companies, where they're paying off, they're paying a supplier, and the supplier wasn't the one they ended up sending the money to. It was a threat actor, and the supplier is still saying, look, I never got any money from you guys. I never told you to send the money there to that bank account. A bad guy did. You still owe me the money. So it gets messy and it gets complicated, and that can hit anybody. That is a very easy attack to carry out. Other cases, less prevalent, data theft, in the sense that they're going in there to look for certain types of data. Now, a ransomware attack has a data theft component too. We'll go through that, but where it's just a dedicated data theft, looking for IP, for example, or something like that, it happens, but it's less frequent. There's something called a denial of service attack, and the best analogy there is you're having a dinner party at your house, and you have a little path that goes up to your house, and you're expecting your 5 guests to show up. Well, imagine if 1,000 strangers showed up and started to knock on your door, and you didn't let any of them in, but they were still on your path. No one else could get in. Your 5 guests couldn't get there because there are 1,000 people on your path in front of your door. So denial of service attack is very similar to that, in the sense that it's disruptive by just hitting your network over and over and over, and denying the ability of those who need the service to obtain the service. Espionage and just causing chaos, that happens, but not as frequently as you might think, but it does happen. And the other point I'd like to make here is that really get into the ransomware attack, because it combines several different elements that we've talked about. So a ransomware attack is typically a double or a triple extortion attack. Now, what happens? So somehow they get into your network, many different ways to get in. It might be there's a vulnerability in software you're using that's internet facing that you didn't patch, your Exchange server, Windows, any of your CRM system, your ERP system, anything that you're using that hasn't been patched. And really, how many of us patch our big systems, super frequently? Most of the time there's a patching cycle, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Well, if a vulnerability is released and a patch is released to correct that vulnerability by a company, and you don't patch it, you're potentially open to an attack. Phishing, everyone clicks on these things. They do. They just catch you unaware. You're drinking your coffee, you're talking on the phone with someone, email comes in, looks interesting, looks like it's from someone you know, you click on it, kaboom. That's how they get in. So once they get in, the double extortion for a ransomware attack works in the following ways. They get in and they sit there quietly and they try to figure out their way around your network. They, in some cases, they'll do it more quickly. In other cases, they'll sit around for months. In fact, the people that broke in may not be the people that eventually extort you because they might sell your credentials. So that would be something known as an initial access broker, where they're brokering the breach. They're brokering the fact that I broke into your network and I'm going to make that available to you. And so, but either case, you've got a threat actor or a bad guy that's in your network. And what they do is they go around and they plant little back doors everywhere so that they can come and go as they please. And they start to exfiltrate data, meaning they start to steal your data. Now, what data are they looking for? Is this, the plans for the Coke formula? No, it's just data. They take a lot of data. The most I've seen is 2 terabytes, just gone. And they take everything. And in some cases, they may not take everything. They might take 50 gigabytes of data. That's a lot of data. In some cases, they'll be methodical. They'll actually look for personal information because they know that's going to be an Achilles heel for many organizations. They'll look for credit card information. They'll look for financial information. They'll read your cyber insurance policy. That's one of the first things they do. They'll track that policy down to see what your ransomware payment amounts are in your policy, if you have such a thing. They'll look at your financial statements, see how much you've got in the bank as well. So your bank statements. They will do a whole bunch of recon. They won't sit there on your network and do it. Rather, they'll mount all that stuff. They'll clean it out, send it up to a server somewhere, and then they will mine that information. And that takes time for them. So it could take, a little while for them to do that. And when they feel comfortable that they've got what they need, at that point, they will either have dropped in some malware or they will send some malware over to you through one of those backdoors that they've left themselves. And they will trigger that and it will encrypt your network. It'll encrypt all the machines connected on your network and it will propagate very quickly. And it really does happen quickly. And so you show up at work in the morning, nothing works. Your servers aren't working, your computers aren't working. And instead you've got, every time you turn on a machine, there's this little text file, little ransom note that pops up that says you've been hacked. And that's where it all starts. And so the double extortion here is they will sell you in return for payment the decryption key to allow you to decrypt your systems and let your operations start again. And they will also delete, and remember, these are bad guys, so there are no guarantees of anything in life, certainly here. But they will delete the data that they've taken, or in some cases even give you the passwords to the site where they've put the data, and you can go delete it yourself. And if they delete it, they'll send you what's known as a shred log or a deletion log. And and that's it. That's where it ends, and then you sort of restore using the decryption keys, etc. So that's the double extortion. In some cases, there's a triple extortion. And the third layer of extortion is if you don't pay them, a couple of things happen. You never get the decryption key. That's extortion 1. Number 2, they publish your personal information, data, whatever that they've stolen on the dark web. And the third is they will hit you with a denial of service attack. And they will keep coming after you over and over and over perniciously. We see that less frequently, but it does happen. Final point, just as part of the intro to the nature of these attacks. So you might say, well, okay, how many of these groups are really that sophisticated? First of all, there are a lot of them, but there is a finite number. But what has happened in the last couple of years is those groups got sophisticated and realized there was another revenue stream they could capture. Rather than developing the tools and executing the attacks themselves, what if they just developed the tools, executed some attacks to sort of proof of concept, and then they license the tools or use it as a service? So you've heard of software as a service. Well, this is ransomware as a service. So you might not be a sophisticated threat actor yourself that is capable of breaking into a network, but you don't need to be. The tools are out there for your use. And to the extent you're able to successfully extort someone, you're paying back into the service provider that allowed you to use their platform. So it's gotten very complicated and very sophisticated. Who are the attackers? Criminal groups, typically. Many of them based in Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine. It was interesting. The Ukrainian group sort of went silent for a couple of weeks. I think they sort of moved around and relocated, elements of their organizations. But we did notice a bit of a dip, where I did certainly, and a few others I spoke to did, in attacks, but it was only a couple of weeks, and now they're almost making up for it because the attacks are now surging again. So, and with ransomware as a service, it's opened up the threat actor landscape to a lot more, a lot of different people. Who else is part of that attack sort of group? Well, states. And so, various threat, you see the Chinese in there, you see North Korea in there. There's a whole bunch of different state actors who are in there. Is the United States in there? Probably. I think this is just happening on a global level between countries. Iran is in there as well. You might see, one of the fears is terrorist groups. I don't see them typically. And, the way you know that you're not seeing them, or you think you're not seeing them, is the fact that if you are paying a ransom, there are some very strict laws in place in Canada and the US and in other countries that you may not pay any amount of money, transfer any amount of money to a terrorist group. If you do, you're in big, big, big trouble. And so before any ransom ever gets paid, that has to be carefully checked. And the closest I've ever come is a couple of degrees of separation away from North Korea, but we got a clearance in that case from the U.S. that was not a sanctioned group. Kids, yeah, there are kids that mess around. That is, I think that's more the stuff of movies where you use these sort of script kiddies, whatever, that are running around, breaking into things. That's really not the focus. I think the focus is really organized crime because it's a big money game. Now, we at Blake's run a trend study, or we gather data every year. The third year of the trend study is about to come out. I think you guys may have received a copy. I'm not sure if that was sent out or not, but of our 2021 trend study, which is really based on 2020 data. So our 2022 study, which is last year's data, is about to come out. But here are a couple of stats before the study comes out. So over 2021, based on the data we saw, and different, there's different data sets that can be analyzed. We gather a bunch of different data sets and then we sort of crunch them. But in most cases, they're not that far off. The numbers are pretty close. So 55% of the types of attacks were ransomware attacks. The amounts, which I'm sure you're all sort of sitting there wondering, how much, they vary greatly. And I'll give you some numbers. So, you don't ever pay under 100,000 US. That's just not done anymore. The days of $5,000-6,000, those are gone. And many payments now exceed $1 million. Certainly the starting position of the threat actor, in many cases is over $1 million. The largest one I did was, the initial ask was, I think, 20 something million for the ransomware attack. Many of these are negotiated down through the process if there is a payment that is to be made. But in terms of our stats, 58% were over $250,000 US. And just over means over. So it's hard to get an average. Different groups will ransom you for entirely different amounts. So it's a bit messy, but I wanted to give you a sense of the large numbers that are now being asked of you if you are a victim. And one thing I did want to point out, phishing is still a very, very important thing to correct within an organization. And the way you can correct phishing, the best way, in my opinion, is, I mean, there's IT systems that, lock down so that they can't click on attachments or they strip out attachments. There's, there are practical consequences to having that secure system, the negative ones that might affect the way your business runs, but education, education, education. And that doesn't mean publishing a little card and sending it to everyone with a coffee mug or something that might get them interested in reading about it. No, it means make them go through, and these are, there's a lot of different services out there, 15 minutes of training every couple of months. Attack your own organization using different types of testing companies who will send out fake phishing emails. See who's clicking on them. See how many people are clicking on them. There's a whole world dealing with HR issues and cyber, but it is not that expensive to do this stuff. You should do it, and if you can get people to a point where they are educated, you will reduce sort of your footprint out there. You will be much, much harder to attack. Okay, so that takes me to the end of the intro bit here. Let's talk a little bit about what you can do to prepare yourself. Just checking the time here. All right, lots of time left. So let me introduce you to a couple of concepts here. The first concept I'm going to introduce you to is breach coach or breach counsel. That's me. Now, if you're sort of a normal person out there just watching this, you're wondering, why is a lawyer dealing with this? This is not the first person I'd want to call in the case of a cyber attack. It's not the first person I think about. Well, for whatever reason, it's developed that way. And so the concept of a breach coach or breach counsel, and I'll explain why it's important. It is about enterprise risk. Remember, this is not an IT issue. It is an issue that deals with risk, and it's about minimizing damage. It's about controlling all of that through a breach. Your breach coach is not just a generic sort of commercial lawyer or a corporate lawyer. A breach coach is a specialized function. There are probably, I'd say, 5 senior breach coaches in Canada right now, more in the US. And a breach coach is here's an analogy. Think of us as a general contractor in the middle of a breach. So my job is several-fold. We'll get to pre-breach in a second, but if there is an incident, it's to respond to the incident. And as an incident responder, my job is to come in, make sure that I immediately Velcro myself to management. I always tell clients who've never known me, but all of a sudden I've gotten a call in the middle of a breach when they are rather exercised. I come in and I always say the same thing. I said, we're going to be sort of Velcroed together for 3 or 4 weeks. 3 or 4 weeks from now, you will not remember a day where you didn't know me. You're going to think we're best buddies at that point, because it is that intimate a process to go through with a leadership team, whether that's the CEO, chair of a board, depends who's running the breach, but it's typically at the highest levels. My job is to make sure that the environment is immediately stabilized, and we'll go through the anatomy of a breach in a couple of minutes, and ultimately that you are restored and you come out of it with your operations restored and as little financial harm and legal risk as possible. So that's my job. Now, again, you're still wondering why a lawyer. Well, one of the things lawyers have is the concept of privilege. Think of it as special power. Your lawyer is your very, very close advisor, and you need to be able to have extremely candid conversations with your lawyer on legal risk issues, and with the understanding that those cannot go out. Not only are they confidential, but in a lawsuit, they can't be demanded by the plaintiff. So through a breach, it's all about handling risk, and we'll go through what those risks look like in a couple of minutes. But I need to be able to provide you with absolutely, sort of risk-oriented advice where you will make decisions without, fear that anyone else can come back later and question those decisions and find out what went into those decisions. They can question them, but they can't find out what our conversations were. So I then will also go and hire all the investigators, the forensic team, everyone who's going to clean up this situation for you and investigate everything and figure everything out. They work for me. They don't work for you. And they're not in my law firm at all. They are third parties. We deal with a whole bunch, CrowdStrike, Mandiant, KPMG. There's a whole bunch of great breach responders out there. We deal with them, but we engage them. I'll engage a ransomware negotiator. I'll engage a communications firm as well. As needed, of course, depends on the nature of the breach. So that's what a breach coach does. They're your first call. In fact, you should be dealing with a breach coach before you're breached. As part of preparation work. And a breach coach will prepare your business, try to sort of reduce the footprint size in terms of damage that can happen through a series of, processes that they will employ. We have a whole process function that we've developed for pre-breach work to go into an organization and to analyze their current state and then to provide them with a report on recommendations on how to sort of reduce their vulnerability stature out there. Let's talk insurance. I'm not allied with the insurance industry. I do what I do, they do what they do. But I can tell you, I work intimately with insurance companies because when you are breached, it is an unexpected event. And many companies over the past couple of years have been turning their mind to cyber insurance. They get it. They don't know what to do with it until they're breached, and then they figure out what the insurance covers. The insurance industry has been losing money on cyber in a big way. It's funny. I remember a day, probably 5-6 years ago, where one of the larger insurers, one of the world's largest insurers, to remain nameless, we were having dinner, I think, somewhere in the States, I don't remember, and they were saying, when are you Canadians gonna, and as breach counsel, when are you Canadians gonna start bringing us some claims? And I was like, that's an odd thing for an insurance company to say. Why would you want me to bring you claims? It's going to cost you. And they said, we're trying to sell our breach insurance, our cyber insurance, but it's hard to do if we don't have any proof, that we've got, coverage, examples where we've paid claims and all of that. So in any case, those days have changed. And what I remember seeing early last year, was a stat from one of the insurance companies that said they were paying out about $1.30 for every dollar they were collecting in premiums. Now, I don't know much about the insurance industry, but I do know they don't lose money, or they don't like to lose money. None of us do. So as a result, a couple of things have happened. Harder to get cyber coverage these days. They're going to want you to be a better risk than you used to be, for them. So pre-breach preparation is important. Your premiums are going to be much more expensive than they used to be. If you've had coverage, you will have noticed an increase. You will also notice probably the claim limits have dropped, or are certainly not going up. And in some cases, more aggressively, insurers are now saying, we will cover, a cyber incident, but we will not pay your ransom. That's up to you. If you decide to pay a ransom, that's coming out of your money. So all of that means don't count as much. You can't count as much on the insurance industry. And I think they'd agree with that statement. They don't want you to count on them and be, I don't want to say reckless, but to have a moral hazard there. They'd rather you do the necessary work, and then they'll extend coverage, and together that will, be helpful to the organization. So the days of sort of large payouts from insurers where they were just letting it happen, those days are over, in my experience. other things that you can do so get your breach counsel, get your insurance in order, or at least look into it. Develop an incident response plan. Your breach counsel will help you do that. That's a plan that kicks in, when there is a breach. Now, I've seen ridiculous plans out there. I've seen companies selling plans for, $5,000. And people are like, well, I can get this for $5,000. Why do we have to go through an expensive process? And they give you this 85-page document that's based on templates and things. It's useless. And it's useless because you're not going to read it. And you're certainly not going to read it when the house is burning down. You're not going to pull it out of the. So to me, the concept of an incident response plan is a little more personal than that. First of all, a large document does not mean a better document. What you want to do is you want to know who to call when, but you will also want to have gone through the thinking process of what to do in a breach. And that thinking process, that's where you learn the reflexes. You don't learn it from somebody dropping an 85-page PDF in your email box and saying, okay, please send us the check. It's not about that. It's a process. It's a process that you need to pay attention to and you need to spend time on. And your leadership team needs to go through it and think about things and face questions and run mock exercises and do all of that stuff to get properly prepared. So, but you do need a plan, but the plan is just really a vehicle to get you to start thinking and organizing yourself accordingly. So we've talked about education, we've talked about it, but phishing exercises, red team, tabletop exercises for the leadership team. You also want to do some penetration testing and other types of drills. These are fire drills, real, they feel real. And you don't advertise them to the organization saying, hey, tomorrow we're going to have a fire drill. Remember when we used to do that in school, and then people would show up late for school because they wanted to miss the fire drill or whatever. You don't tell anyone you're doing this. This is a real attack. You hire a third-party organization, or we help you do that, and they run an attack on your company. And it's a smoke test. They look for gaps and vulnerabilities and how you respond. And there's nothing that gets management more into understanding this than facing real stress. That is the most important, I think, educational tool you can have. Obviously, IT security is extremely important. Maybe I should have put that first. Getting the right appliances and tools. I go into a lot of large companies and I say, what kind of antivirus or what kind of protection measures have you employed? And they'll say, oh, we have McAfee or Bitdefender. Look, I have Bitdefender. It's great. It's not a plug for the product. I use that at home personally. Important to have that. But, I'm not a company that is worth attacking. There are next generation tools that they're expensive, but they are much, much, much better than this off-the-shelf stuff. They're sophisticated. They often come with monitoring as well by a third party. If you're serious about this stuff and protecting yourselves, you need to start thinking about that. Not going to fit everyone. There's no one size fits all solution here. Network appliances, make sure that you're not using old routers, things like that. It's all nice to repurpose things, and there's definitely a culture that is upon us about using the older stuff and recycling, and that's all great. Don't do that with your network appliances, okay? Because there are all sorts of vulnerabilities, etc. Your operating systems. How many times have I gone into a breach situation and I'm finding old operating systems? The worst of the worst is Windows XP machine sitting somewhere on your network. It's like, why is that there? Well, we had this piece of software that was developed for us like 10, 15 years ago or whatever, and it doesn't run on later versions of Windows, so we keep that machine there. That is a open door invitation for an attack. So that make sure that your IT team is making sure that everything is updated and that you do have strong or at least I don't want to say best in class, but that you've taken paid attention to the kinds of software and hardware that you are operating with. Segment your networks. If you have a manufacturing facility and you will have your CRM system for your sales, you'll have an ERP system, maybe you'll have administration, HR, all of that stuff. Segment your stuff properly. If you're telling me that, look, if our factory goes down, we're gonna lose our shirts, that we have to have our factories up. Okay, well, if your factories then have machines that are in any way networked, keep them on a different network. Segment your networks, keep things separate, and pay very close attention to your really important areas from an IT infrastructure point of view. And the final one for IT, and you've heard it and you've heard it and you've heard it, and I'm sure some people just haven't done it, is multi-factor authentication on everything. Throw it on get used to it, make it part of your life. It's like having coffee in the morning, get really familiar with it. Multi-factor authentication, no more simple passwords. And you might say, well, my password's 16 characters long. That's nothing. Multi-factor authentication, 2 types of authentication to get into things. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use it so that it resets every 4 minutes and you have to keep going. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a smart multi-factor authentication will tie itself, for example, to a device. But if someone's coming in from the outside or from some other device trying to log into your account, they need both types of authentication, your password and whatever else it is, your iPhone or whatever else you've got your authenticator running on. So do that. That is something every company needs to do. Have appropriate policies in place. What you want to do here is, data retention policies. How many of us have those old T-shirts from Rolling Stones concerts back in the day that we just got to hang on to for whatever reason? We're hoarders. We hoard in our real lives. We hoard at work, and data is one of the worst things that we hoard. Everyone hoards data. The pain a person goes through when they delete data is remarkable. So businesses are doing the same thing, right? Everyone's just keeping old data. We've got to get past that. We've got to get to a point where we start to delete data that is no longer needed. Many privacy laws force you to do that at law. If you have personal information, you can't keep it if it's not for the purpose it was collected for. And yet, whenever I go into a breach, it's unbelievable. They'll take all of this and then people say, well, yeah, they've got a bunch of our old customer information. I'm like, how old? I think the 2007, they've never bought anything from you since 2007. No, why do you still have their data? And now that's going to cost you because you're going to have to report that, number one, but you're going to have to potentially go try to find the person and notify them that their data, which was taken, and it could be their SIN number or whatever. So it's data retention, and enforce it. Don't just have a policy, you've got to enforce it. What devices are connecting to your network, make sure that you have strict policies on that and they're enforced. If you're letting suppliers and customers connect to your network, be very aware of that and understand who's connecting. It's generally not a great idea. So if you are, make sure it's properly done and segmented so that anything that happens bad to them doesn't get move laterally over to you. Your contractual clauses, change your contracts. Everyone should have some cyber in their contracts. What does that mean? That means that to the extent a vendor or a customer of yours that is connected to you is in any way breached, you want to be informed of that breach. You also will, in certain cases, if anyone's connecting to your network, put them through a bit of a diligence, meaning send them a questionnaire, analyze what their preparedness is, what kind of security systems they've got in place, because they might be the way into your organization, and that happens a lot as well. Okay, so that's pre-breach preparedness. Just checking the time here. All right, I'm going to kind of wind it up pretty quickly because I've covered off a lot of the stuff here. Want to go through what happens during a breach, and I'm going to do this very, very quickly. The first thing that happens is you notice the breach. Okay, and so you notice the breach. First thing, everyone panics. Okay, no one knows what to do. You need to keep a cool head. Okay? First thing to do, call your breach coach. If you don't have a breach coach because you didn't organize it until then, find one and call them. It can be me, it can be any of us that operate in Canada, but get your breach coach called because they will provide that mental stability and the knowledge, and they will move quickly. We're very dispassionate in a sense. It sounds bad, but that's what you need. No loose talk about the breach right away. Get your IT people to take everything offline right away. Do not overwrite anything. Do not reformat. Don't do any of that stuff. If you do that, you're going to overwrite the logs. You might also have caught an encryption in the middle of the encryption, and you might cause all sorts of other damage to your data and systems. What will I do? Well, my first job is to come in and scope out the situation, which I do usually pretty quickly with my team in a matter of hours. I will then connect with your insurer if there is one. I will retain a forensic firm that will help you with restoration and also the analysis of what happened. I may get a ransomware negotiator involved. They are very, very useful. Even if you're not going to pay a ransom, talking to the bad guys isn't the worst thing. Now, don't do this on your own. It's important that you don't. And there's an appropriate time to do it and an inappropriate time to do it. The minute you go into a chat room, they will run a clock on you and the pressure will mount. So you don't want to do it yourself. You also don't know how to deal with them. I don't know how to, I see how to deal with them. I don't deal with them. I buffer with a ransomware negotiator. And they're very good, and they deal with these guys all the time, and they're so worth their weight in gold. I may have to get a PR firm involved as well. That's up to you. Depends on the organization. How long does a breach take? I got asked that last night. Someone got breached on the weekend, big organization. How long is this going to take? It's like they're impatient. And so the answer that came back is it's going to take weeks, and it could take months. And the longest breach I did ran from March last year till January this year. It doesn't mean they were shut down. They were back up and running, but the remnants and all the after effects took almost a year. And so the first thing we'll do once we're in is stabilize and contain everything and assess. Forensic investigation will kick off next. These are forensic investigators. They will examine everything in your system. They will find the back doors. They will find out how they got in, if they can, unless you got a very crafty bad guy who's been able to very carefully cover their tracks. But this is really the war between the experts, the expert hacker and the expert forensic team. And we may have to negotiate at that point. Once all that's done, if you've had data that was stolen, for example, and you didn't negotiate, you said, no, I'm not going to, then we'll need to figure out in some cases what data was stolen. So there's a whole data analytics piece that gets done. We walk through everything. You don't need to remember or even know this. That if you remember one thing out of this entire talk today, it's get a breach coach and make sure that they are impaneled with your organization. But they will handle all of this. And so we may need to analyze all the data. And that is a very expensive and time-consuming exercise. There are situations where, you've had 43 million, files taken out of a system. And you got to find out which of those files had personal information in it. And some are spreadsheets from HR where they might have, 1,000 employees with all sorts of data listed. So analyzing all of that in order to provide notifications to those people is a very time-consuming and expensive exercise, if it has to be done. Post-breach, that means after all this is over, there could be litigation. Fortunate for you, you're in Canada. It's not the most litigious society. In the US, if you're a public company, the second you announce the breach, which has to be right away, you will get a claim. You will just get one. Matter of course, someone will send you a claim so that they can get their place in line if a lawsuit erupts later, and they will look to start to go after you. The personal injury lawyers in the States are now hunting for cyber breaches. So you're the victim, and yet they're going to sue you afterwards because you lost control of people's data, and they will try to get those people together. Class action risk is prevalent. You've got class action legislation in BC that allows for this. There could also be some director liability and officers liability as well. If you buried your head in the sand, did not address security issues, it is now obvious to everyone, not just on this call, but everyone out there who's in a leadership position, that data security is a thing. Okay, you may not know much about it, but it's a thing that you need to pay attention to. If you did not, and you let things go, then arguably you didn't exercise sort of prudence in your role, and you can be sued personally. It doesn't happen often, very rare, in fact, but it is a risk. And if you're in that leadership position, you don't like that kind of risk hanging over your head. And final thing I'll say, what's the prediction for this year? I think we're going to see more targeted attacks where they are really doing their diligence, the threat actors. They're moving very quickly. They're more nimble. They're in and out. We're seeing ransomware as a service go everywhere. So there's more people attacking more companies. I think older companies, what I'll call bricks and mortar companies, are ironically more at risk in many cases than the more sophisticated sort of digital companies, for the simple reason that they use older systems. They don't pay attention to this stuff. They might be manufacturing windows and doors, or you might have a brick company, literally like a bricks and mortar company. So those companies are easy targets typically because they're not up to speed on all things digital and patching and getting proper network appliances in place, et cetera. So I'm going to stop there, Jen, and we can move to questions.
Have a few. We definitely have a few that have come in. So just want to get those started here. So what can we do? So when we think about a startup that is, say upwards of max, a couple of people, up to 5 people team, what can they do to effectively prevent cyber attacks, knowing sort of there's cost and considerations and things in place for them?
It's a great question, and if it was an easy answer, they wouldn't have asked the question. I guess if I were in the position, that's the easiest way for me to do this. First thing I'd think about is, do I really know anything about network security, or am I just such a startup that I need developers, I need these people, I need, but I can't really afford to spend a lot of money on network security. So if that's the case, then I want to probably, practically speaking, limit what I keep on the network. And the minute you start collecting personal information and data, you better be in the security game. So if you're not that kind of a business, you're developing code, you're doing whatever, you don't want your code getting out there for sure. But make sure that you try to keep things perhaps offline. Use third-party cloud providers as much as possible. Do the basics. Keep strong passwords, multi-factor. Try to do things like that, which you can do on a relatively shoestring budget. But the minute you sort of go live and start commercializing, and like I said, if you're in the retail game at all, you're definitely going to need some security. If you're connecting to other people's systems, you might be the easy way into their systems, which could eventually torpedo your own business. So start paying attention to all of those things. There's no magic solution. It is expensive. It's the reality we live with. Digital has made us able to do all sorts of things on the cheap and saved us all sorts of costs, whether it's real estate or whatever. But it's come with its own set of costs, and this is one of them.
Absolutely. Taking a thread on that, as we think about, you talked a little bit around the employee side and what organizations internally can do. So, aside from some of the phishing related education that you were speaking to, are there other kinds of internal training that organizations can look, to consider to sort of, empower and mobilize their people to be vigilant on this front?
So, I call it phishing training, but there are a number of third-party organizations that provide these sorts of programs. Now, what you do is once you sign up for these programs, this is an HR function. So, they need to make sure people have actually done the training. And by the way, many people don't do the training, right? Or they try to get away with it. It comes in an email, please, you have to do this training. It's online. It won't take more than 10 minutes, and then you have to do another one next month. And they don't do it. So you need to put in place, and these companies will track who's done it, who hasn't, report it back to the company. Then the next step is, a couple of messages go back. You haven't done your training, but if they continue to not do their training, that needs to go to management at that point. That becomes an issue. So you do the training, you do the tabletops as well for management. You do the various types of outside attacks and tests, and that's it. But the training is not a it's an ongoing thing. So, and it's amazing once you show people who are not technically savvy in their minds how to spot some of these things and how easy it is to do, they really learn it and they pick up on it really quickly. So I've found the training programs to be simple. They're cartoonish in a way in many cases, and they're excellent in terms of teaching.
Thank you for that. Another question that's come in, I guess I try to splice two of them together, is around, are you seeing a rise in third-party vendor supply chain hacks in Canada? And sort of a parallel to that is, are there also some examples around contract language for vendors, knowing that this side is sort of connected?
Yeah, so in terms of sort of the whole supply chain kind of hacks, and I mean, there's different meanings to that, but if you're looking at kind of a SolarWinds hack, or where they're actually implanting, if that's the nature of the question, implanting malware inside chips, for example, or in software, and then the software goes out, it is still relatively rare to see that. However, any company that is providing any materials that are certainly part of a computer or networking supply chain, so you're providing, I don't know, components that go into switches or routers or computers or et cetera, and you're attacked, part of our function in investigating that attack is extremely heightened, because all the big players in the industry, and whether you're an electric car company or you're some other massive computer company that receives that, they all have extremely sophisticated cyber teams, and they will audit you immediately. The minute they learn that you've been attacked, if you're one of their vendors that's supplying them, they will be all over you. So that's something I didn't cover here. Post an attack, you are going to definitely get customer inquiries. And if you're an audited company, your auditors, your financial auditors will be all over you for this. So it goes on and on. If you're a government organization, you're going to have the Auditor General of the state, whether it's federal, provincial, whatever, they will be all over you. So and you've got to show them a clean bill of health, which isn't an easy thing to do, right? They ask all sorts of questions. It's very invasive.
Absolutely. So a little bit back again around sort of I think the training part is sort of hit a little bit, and where you talked about sorry, I'm just lost my place here for a second, where you talked about sort of the training is, how do you ensure, or how can one ensure sort of that the phishing, that this and related training org is not actually a hacker? So is there a way to vet? And sort of in parallel to that, would it be a litigation issue, or could it be if someone refused the training that's not required? So I guess that's parallel.
Okay, so two components. One, yeah. There are a number of organizations that are no. I mean, I understand that the nature of the question. What if the trainer is themselves a hacker? I think that's a little bit extreme. I think there are a number of well-known training outfits out there and so it's not hard to find them. I'm not going to give you any names here because I'm not here to sell anybody's service or product, and I also don't want to be liable if it doesn't work out for anyone. I'm just teasing. So yeah, I think there are a number of those. Now, if somebody doesn't follow the training, that's really an HR or an employment law problem. So it's like anything else, right? They're putting the organization at risk. Different provinces have different employee rules in them, and but as a general comment, usually there's an escalation. Management meets with them, puts a note in their file. If they continue to not do it, second note and a warning. And after a certain number of warnings, if they are not doing what they're supposed to do as an employee of an organization, you can move to terminate them. That's typically how it happens. But before anyone runs out and does that, you've got to get the right advice for your province or jurisdiction. But that's the typical way to handle it. Okay. This is part of their job function.
Okay, and I'll take us with one final question here. There was mention earlier on in the chat about lapsus, and there's a part of it that there's a kid involved apparently as well too, but lapsus sort of, is this sort of alleged, hacker collective, headlines with the Okta breach that is being, is used by companies such as Peloton and others. Groups like this are saying that their goal is only sort of money, but it comes, right, as a time of heightened fears around potential attacks from Russia, and knowing sort of what is happening with Russia and the Ukraine. Do you foresee, an increase in these attacks? And is this highlighting a new level of cybersecurity threats by what's just recently happened?
Yeah, so I think all of that goes into a pretty simple question. Do I need to be super careful now, or even more careful now, because of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine? I think that's what it all boils down to. And I wish I knew the 100% answer for that, but what I do know is that the U.S. president just 3 or 4 days ago, maybe even a bit longer, released a statement where he actually said, "Prepare yourselves, Western organizations. You are going to start to get hit. We've got credible intelligence that that is what is going to happen." As a counter for the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. And so we sent out a bulletin to our clients saying, look, don't want to be, don't want to be overly alarmist. And, I feel like I'm always out there with a bullhorn trying to scare people. But I see this stuff happen every single day. It's why I have bags under my eyes, because I work on this 7 days a week. It is happening constantly. And we do know, and I do believe, that the US government's got all sorts of sort of advanced warning of this stuff. They're not going to release how. So if the president comes out and makes that statement, I think you've got to pay attention to it. And I have noticed an increase in attacks in the past couple of weeks, where I thought it was kind of slow at the beginning of the year, which was great. And by the way, your audience might find this interesting. Christmas has been a train wreck in my household for the last couple of years, because dad's always working through Christmas, because in Christmas Day, right, we had one client got attacked on Christmas Day. And yet in January, like when everyone's going back to school and everyone's back at work, I'm actually having a pretty easy go of it, right? Because it's Orthodox Christmas, Orthodox New Year. It's celebrated, differently. So I always found that curious, and I've talked to a number of service providers in the cyber field, and they all say the same thing. They say, "Oh yeah, January is always, lighter." The hackers actually, they take time off. And if you don't believe me, I've been part of, again, I'm not the negotiator, but part of conversations with various hacking groups. They take the weekends off. They'll be very open with you. You'll be like, we just need another day before we can pay the rent. So like, listen, I'm off for the weekend. I will reestablish contact on Monday, and they work normal hours. They're shifted in time, which is another way to find out what country they're from. If you start to profile their time zone, when they're on, when they're off, you can kind of figure out what part of the world they're in. But now what we found is the groups are so spread out. They're using people all over the world that it is hard to just use that metric. A couple of years ago, that made more sense.
Wow. Thank you, Sunny. So hackers going to hack, but hackers also are striving for that work-life balance, as is everybody else, if you're looking at this. So thank you. I'll pass it back now to Annika. Thank you, Sunny.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. I know we went a few minutes over time, but there were a lot of great questions. We do have our supercluster contact information, as well as Blake's and Sunny's information in case there are any follow-up questions. We know that this is an extremely timely and important topic given the current events today. So thank you to Sunny for taking the time to share his expertise with us. We really appreciate it. As mentioned, we'll be sharing the recording following the session, as well as a copy of Blake's 2021 cybersecurity trend study that Sunny referenced. So you can all expect that in the follow-up email this afternoon. And thank you so much for attending again. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.